Hi everybody, my name is Steffen. Go ahead and get started here. I have a cold. I apologize if I go into some kind of coughing fit or I lose my voice. I don't know if any of you had Fisherman's Friend. It's a cough drop that tastes absolutely horrible, and I inadvertently found grape flavored water to go with it, so grape and cough drop is awesome. But I'll go ahead and dive right in. This is going to be kind of a live coding exercise for the most part. It's very casual. If you have questions or just concerns about something that you want to learn a little bit more about as we go, please interject. It's more to be interactive and as a conversation rather than just a lecture. All right, about me, I'm Steffen. I own Stonefin Technology. It's just a custom dev shop. You dream it, we build it. I grew up on a farm here in Nebraska. I was in the Army National Guard for 8 years. Graduated from UNL and have done many, many crazy things that don't really have anything to do with software development in my life. And I kind of jumped around on that, but Stonefin, we like to do a lot of business workflow automation type work. The past couple of years, we've picked up a lot of work helping design firms actually with WordPress builds, where they'll have a WordPress build, they'll get 98% of what they need done with plugins and whatnot, or they'll get all their plugins done and then there's some sort of weird performance conflict that they can't figure out. My team can come in, figure out what the conflict is. We can submit pull requests back to the original developers or just fix it and give it to you or whatever you want. We're kind of the Swiss Army knife when it comes to fixing things and getting things rolling. Today I'm going to be using a few things. I don't know if they're going to publish this PowerPoint for you guys to get these links. My development environment is PHP Storm. I don't know if any of you have used PHP Storm. It's an amazing PHP development environment. If you've ever used Visual Studio and then liked that, this is like the closest synonym to that, where you can set breakpoints and step through code in PHP, not just like in the Chrome debugger where you're stepping through JavaScript. And it also has a really cool integration with varying vagrants, which is really a weird, hard to say name sometimes. We usually just say VVV. But that has to do with spinning up virtual machines on your local dev environment, so you can have a virtual WordPress server there running as though it's really on the cloud that you can develop and debug against. It's probably very similar to what Flywheel's just released, are accomplishing the same goals. This is just a little bit nuts and bolts for how you do that. I use Atlassian Source Tree for source control, and you'll see me click through that a little bit at some point. And then creating the GPL license, it's something that I'm not really well versed at. I found this site really cool. It kind of explains how it all works, what it really means, and it runs you through like a tutorial where you answer questions, and then it just spits out all of your license code that you can put into a plugin. If you ever make a plugin and want to make it GPL, that's a really cool way to do it. Sure.
Why does Atlassian offer Source Tree free?
Just a distribution list as far as I know. Yeah, I don't understand it either personally, but yeah, it's out there, it's free. They force you to register. You have to get a license, but it's free. We're going to start talking about a lot of code and really geek speak stuff. So I don't know if any of you are not coders. This might be a little over your head. I apologize. I'll do my best to translate from geek speak to English. There's these core things that a plugin needs. When you have WordPress and you install a plugin, there's a weird connecting point where the WordPress plugin has to actually be executed in code. And WordPress needs to know how to talk to it. That magic connector is the very first thing on this list, called require once. So when you create the plugin, you put your file into this plugin folder, and then WordPress goes and looks at your plugin and reads your file, and it says require once, and then you can go require all of your other PHP files. Just call this over and over again for all the various PHP files you need within your solution. So now you've got your PHP code in a place where WordPress can execute it. Well, now you need to make it so your code executes at the right time. And that's where the do action and add actions and the add filters and apply filters come into play. So when you have click actions throughout WordPress, and I'll refer to WooCommerce type situations, add things to cart and things of that nature. When they made their plugins for WooCommerce, they created actions for like add to cart, and they're just sitting there waiting for somebody like me to come in and say, I want to add an action that ties to that same event. So whenever somebody adds something to a cart, I give them a pop-up that says, woohoo, you added something awesome, or whatever other thing you might want to do with it. The add action, do action has more to do with back-end code. The apply filters and add filters has more to do with changing the display right there at that moment as the code's being run. A lot of times when people add scripts and like CSS and JavaScript files to their HTML, they just drop in the tags in the PHP, like the script links and stuff like that. Unfortunately, in WordPress, that'll actually add things out of order because you can't add it to the head the way you're supposed to and get it in the right place in the page so that things execute in the right order. The way to get your plugin to tell WordPress to put it in the right place is the enqueue methods for both styles and script that I have here. And if you go Google these, you can find the documents on the details of those. And I don't use filters in my example today, but it's the same gist as the actions for the most part. And now on to the live demonstration where things are just going to probably go crazy. And I'm going to start out in PHP Storm here. And on my other screen that you're not seeing where I have my notes, I'm going to start talking about a scenario. You know, what we're going to build here is a plugin for WordPress. What we have here in front of us is a development environment. It's just a straight WordPress site. There's nothing else to it. In this scenario, we have a store. It has 2 locations. And you want to create shortcodes that allow you to display those store locations and information about their where they are, maybe a map with pinpoints, and maybe their business hours that's automatically pulled from the Google Places API. So you don't want to maintain times within your website. You just want to pull from Google Places because you keep that up to date anyway. So we want to build a plugin from the ground up that does those kinds of things. To build a plugin in WordPress, it's actually really, really simple. So you have a folder in the plugins folder. I don't know if you can kind of see, it's just WP content plugins. And I made my plugin name multi-store Google Places shortcodes, which is extremely verbose and hard to type over and over again. But all we have to do is add files to that folder, 2 files. And I'm going to do some magic copy paste action over here because we'll run out of time if I don't. So now there's just magically 2 files in this folder. There's a README with very little content in it. You know, you can put whatever you want in it. And then there's the multi-store plugin itself, and this is all the code that's in it. The key things that this file needs to have so that WordPress knows how to pick it up and show it in the menus for the add remove plugins are actually in the comments up here. You have a plugin name, a plugin URI, like where you can go to download this. And this is a real GitHub repo. Anybody's welcome to fork and grab and contribute to this if they want to. You know, you add a description, a version, an author, and a URI for the author. And then these are just standard comments. And then this little nugget right here. First time I looked at that and I thought, that looks like that's just garbage. Why do you have that? That's extra code. I don't know if anybody's ever tried just navigating to a plugin PHP file through the address bar. Something like, you know, wordpresssite.com/wp-content/plugin/plugin.php, something along those lines. This little nugget at the top of your PHP file is what makes it so that people can't do that. You don't want them executing your PHP code directly because it's not made to work that way. And those are where hacks can tend to get exploited. I know one of the questions to the Flywheel guy this morning, you know, how do they protect against being hacked and things of that nature? I think the biggest thing is making sure you've got plugins with consistent patterns like this, making sure your operating system is patched up and up to date, and making sure WordPress is patched up and up to date. Those are your key things to keep yourself safe. I've recovered dozens of people's sites that have been hacked over the years, and every one of them has been patched. If I just bring it up to the latest level of WordPress, the security vulnerability that led to it goes away. Like, they just don't have to worry about what got them in the first place. So keeping things patched is very important. And then as you're building plugins yourself, making sure you have little things like this so that you can't accidentally expose your site to something hackers can get into. So if we I'm going to demonstrate the varying vagrants thing here from PHP Storm. The link to the varying vagrants thing has a whole write-up on how to configure your development environment, but I can come and vagrant up, and we'll have this little thing. This is actually creating or spinning up a virtual server on my laptop right here.
Vagrant's an alternative to like Oracle VM, right?
It's actually running on Oracle VM under the covers here.
It's kind of container technology.
Yes, there's several installers. Oracle has to be installed. You have to have hypervisor or Hyper-V enabled and things like that. But there's a whole write-up. If you go to the varying vagrants URL that I had in the presentation, you'll see the how-to on that. So now that I have that running, there's one little thing that I haven't ironed out why I have to do this every time, but it's not quite running yet. So, and now I just went through this menu to SSH into it. Maybe, there we go. So now I've got an SSH session to my virtual server right here in my dev environment. And it's xdebug. All right, so I have to turn that on so that it communicates properly back and forth to PHP Storm. So we'll minimize that down. And now I can just simply start debugging my site. It launched Chrome over here on my other window, and it's starting my WordPress site. What's that? No, sorry, I got lots of notes over here, so I'm kind of jumping. So this is just a simple WordPress site, default, I think it's 2016 theme. I'll log in quick with our super secure admin and password. And it's off the side of the screen on mine, but not on yours. All right. So if we come in and look at plugins, we'll see that my plugin showed up just by the nature of having that folder created and that file there. It does absolutely nothing other than let you activate it, but it's there. So now we'll move on to, I'm going to drag some files around here. Again, if you really want to see what's going on, I am bear with me a moment. I'm launching source tree. I forgot to have that going. All right, so I'm just, I've got source tree up on this other screen, which I will drag over here for you. And all I'm doing is going through the various commits that I have here. If you go to look at this repo, you will see exactly these commits and these notes. I started with the empty plugin, and now I'm adding to going on to the next section, which all of these files just got added in PHP Storm. So the key things that just happened that I added to this is with that plugin or with that URL I said for licensing, where it walks you through creating an actual license, it gives you basically, after asking a few questions, all of this header information. You know, you saw the bare minimum you needed for the plugin to work. Well, if you use this licensing website that I gave you, it actually generates all of that automatically and puts it nicely and formatted and adds all the license code to it. It gives you the license TXT file, which is the actual GPL license, or the GNU the GNU GPL. And it also gives you the proper layout for the README file as well. So it just gives you all of that. So now you are, GPL like everybody wants to do with WordPress. And then what we did now is, now our plugin, we're going to add a custom post type. So if you've attended the last session on custom post types, that's how you can use plugins to create them. This is how they work under the covers. This is how a custom post type is actually created. We're going to create a custom post type for our store locations. So we have, two stores right now. We hope to have more. So we just want to make this so that we can have as many stores as we want in the system and have all of this work. So we're going to add this file here. This is where the custom post type for store locations is created and various actions associated with managing store locations. We have a bunch of fields associated with the stores. In hindsight, after I got done, I realized I probably could have pulled all that from Google API or Google Places, but we left the fields in there just as examples of having fields to set up. And it has a little bit of custom or functionality around the administration of the post type, like validating and saving data. But it doesn't actually have an admin area per se. So you'll see in store locations, we add some actions to go about how to save things. So if you have a custom post type, you're going to be entering fields and data, and then you're going to hit save at some point. And when you hit save, this is the code that takes care of that save action. It's very common to have add actions at the top of your file. That's just a pattern that I've noticed when I go through other people's code on WordPress. I kind of like it, so I stick to that. If you had filters to add, put them right below the actions. And then we simply create the custom post type. So these are the labels for the names throughout the plugin. This is kind of leads to localization. If you want to have a multilingual site, you can redefine this array for the various languages. So you can add a language selector someplace and then redefine this array, and then all of the text within your plugin changes to match whatever that language is. We are only one language today. And this part contains more information about how to create a custom post type. This is more like default WordPress stuff. This isn't like me dreaming it up. You have to have labels and description and these kind of things. You add your fields, and then you register the post type. And that's what actually is like the kill command that makes it happen. And we've got some more stuff on fields. And here we're adding a location page for what's called the meta box. And we'll go into what that is here in a second. But that's more about the UI of the custom post type and where you enter the data. And then where we added those actions for the save actions, this is where all the save logic is. This is just kind of normal PHP stuff. There's some WordPress specific calls. Here you can see that we're checking to make sure that the person has the right to edit the post. So having security up front is really helpful. Adding it later can be a bear. And then we're also doing some field validation here. We're just checking to see if things are empty for the most part. And then at the end, we update the post data. And this is a standard WordPress call to update a post. And then we have another function here, if we fail validation, how to pop up a message within the UI to tell them that something failed. And then more about validation down here. So that's what the store locations, we reference the pages. This is the UI code for editing the fields within the custom post type. You can see we set up an array for a state selector, and then it's just HTML with a few WordPress specific things. To tie things to the various fields. And the other thing that we included on this, we referenced this in the, I believe we added it here. We added a require one store locations, which added this, and then store locations also added this, which is the class for your store locations. So PHP out of the box, I don't know how many of you are object-oriented developers by any stretch of the word. You can create the concept of classes within PHP and give yourself some hierarchical boundaries that way. I feel like that helps new developers come in that look at your code and they want to modify it. They can see, all right, everything that has to do with my terribly named multi-store Google Places shortcode location class. You can come in and see all of the attributes about it, all of the methods that pertain to that class. And you can modify that code here. I'm not going to go through this line by line because it would take forever. I invite you all to fork this repo and ask questions. My email address is in the presentation. But this is just this kind of gives you the UI perspective of the post type. And then all right, so now at this point, if we go back to our plugin, and I'm going to refresh the screen here. We can see over to the left here, we've got this locations area now, because we've got a custom post types for locations now. And we can add a new location. I'm going to use a company that is near and dear to me, Source Seat Fit in Lincoln. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. And we're going to go get the Google Places ID for it. And we have this ID here. We're not going to use this ID yet, but this is handy to have. And then I've got a latitude and longitude that'll factor into pinpoints. I'm not going to bother filling that in at this point. We're just going to go ahead and publish this. And we go back to all locations, and we can see that's there. And I'm going to add a second location just so we can see the full scope of this. All right, so I'll go ahead and save that one. And I didn't get the Google ID, or Google Place ID for it. Oh, come on. The cursor behaves a little weird in this map. All right, so now we've got our locations in there. It doesn't do anything special yet. We don't have any shortcodes. We don't have any maps. We can't actually talk to Google Places at this moment, but that's the next step. So we'll go to adding the Google API, and the changes we will see here. We added the admin area. In order to communicate with Google Places, you have to have an API key. And in order to have an API key, you have to have a settings area to put it in, or you hard code it, which end users don't like that. So you want to create an input box for it. For this example, we probably went a little over the top as far as how we structured things out, but this is meant to be a base that maybe any of you can take and build your own plugins from this base if you really wanted to. So we have this. Make sure I have the right ones that I'm talking about, the notes. All right, so this settings file, this registers the menus with WordPress. When this file is included, this has the code that tells WordPress, hey, these things correspond to actual menu items that need to show up in the left-hand menu. And then it also creates the UI for that menu, or for the entry UI for that menu item. And then we have a template, which is the HTML and a little bit of PHP revolving around that input page. So now what we've done is we've created a templates area that, if you came into my plugin and you said, well, I want to create a new template just for this interface so that it's custom for this install, that won't necessarily break the plugin if the plugin ever gets updated, and it won't break for the users necessarily. Now we've got a templating area where you can decide to use different templates for the views. And then the other thing we added in the includes area is a Google Places API, PHP. This just has a bunch of logic that we put together that involves going and getting Google Place data, getting grid coordinates, things of that nature, office hours, since that is kind of the point of what we're going for as well. So yeah, that's the core of it. You know, if we go back to our base PHP file, we'll see that we got another require once added to this for the admin screen. So now the admin screen is being included and our base code is being included separately. And if we go look at our WordPress site, wrong one, and refresh this screen, we have a new settings area. So we can go here, and I can add a Google Maps API key, which I don't have one currently. Actually, that is inaccurate because I have one in Notepad right here. And I'm going to hit Save Changes. And this is actually, I intentionally left this. There's a bug. You notice it just went away rather than saving. So when I save it, it just disappears, and that's frustrating. You know, users don't like that. If I go look at this commit, I can see exactly where that change happened. So it was in the admin settings PHP. So basically what's happening is I renamed some of the classes after I built it because I didn't like the first name and came up with something, you know, really awesome later. So when I renamed things, there were like namespaces that changed. So when the post happens from the page, it says, all right, I'm just generic WP locations, which is a very generic name. I don't recommend using generic names for your slugs when you're making custom plugins because you tend to overlap with somebody else's plugin, and then all of a sudden things break. So you try to be a little bit unique there. So when I did that rename, I missed a couple places. So that, I wish I could just copy and paste out of there. Shortcode settings and store locations. Seven and 12. All right, so I'm just going to let the source code jump ahead a little bit here, and I'll talk through the changes because it looks like I will end up running out of time if I don't speed up a little bit here. So I fixed that. So now if I come back to the screen here, and I'll refresh this once, and because the post slug changed for my custom post type, the page I was on is broken. Now, like, this doesn't exist because type WP location isn't a thing. So if I go back to the admin, and you can see I changed my name, multi-store locations instead of just locations. And of course my places disappeared because the slug, everything, it basically, by making that last rename operation, it porked everything. So now I got to come back here. I can save these changes, and it's successfully saved. I can go back to my locations. I'll have to re-add those quick. And why is that's no good. All right. I'm going to go back one commit on that. All right, so what I did is I just undid that WP locations change. And I'll have to fix that eventually. So I missed something before in my preparations there, so I apologize. So my locations came back, and if I go back to my settings area, because I had already saved that with the good code, it's magically still there, so I can just fake it right now, which we all love. And if I go into look at these locations, the other key thing that changed is we added code for going and getting grid coordinates for these locations based on the Google Places ID. So if I hit update on here, presto, we have grid locations of the exact location for that from Google Places. And we can go back and kind of look at the code for that. All right, refresh. Okay, maybe it's not a thing. All right, so if we go back and look at, that was the code that we just added. Now we're going to talk about the short codes. Since I jumped ahead in the commits, we'll just go straight to that code. We added templates for our short codes. So we want to add short codes for your store hours. So if you go out to Google Places, you're open Monday through Friday, these hours, Saturday, these hours, Sunday, these hours. It's various formatting involved with that to get it to lay out nice and cleanly within a block on the page, right? So we added templates for just those occasions. So if you look over here, we've got a long date, a short date, a today, and then there's actually one for the map as well that we created for templating there. And all this is the markup to lay that out on the screen whenever we use that shortcode. So in this case, we have 4 templates, but we're actually preparing for 2 shortcodes, and I'll go into why there's 3 for one shortcode and 1 for the other in just a second. And then we added some CSS, just simple stuff. There's not much to it, but we had some CSS to add to make it look nice. Again, this could be customized by anybody, and some JavaScript for the Google Maps portion. So when you go to do Google Maps stuff, you'll find all sorts of documentation on how to embed a map on your screen. Most of this is JavaScript related to that. It's not earth-shattering by any means. And then in the store locations, if we go back and look at that, you can see we've got all these add actions, and then we've got all these add shortcode. So this is the magic kicker that adds shortcodes to your site. It's really simple. What's your shortcode name? And what function do you want to generate the text to replace that? It's actually really, really simple. The complex part that we did is we made it so that this shortcode is going to go out to Google and get stuff for us, format it, make it nice and clean, and then go stick it back within our site. So, I mean, we could make a shortcode that just took, flibbity flub and changed it to flibbity flab or something like that every time you saw it on the site. It's the concept of the shortcode is really, really simple. It's the magic behind that shortcode that can get complicated. So yeah, now if we go back to our site, nothing's really changed in the admin. All we did was we added the shortcodes. So if we go look at pages, I magically have some pages that I had set up. So here is an example of a page. We've got general hours. We've got our awesome shortcode name that's hard to pronounce. And I wanted to make it so that I could create a shortcode and say, I only want to show the store number 4, hours for that store. Or if you don't specify any parameters, it'll just display them all. So you'll see that I'll see the default, the long format, the short format, and today's hours on this page. Or at least it's supposed to. And the reason that that broke is because if I go look at my locations, they have different IDs than I started with. So I've got 33 and 32, and there's some ghost data. So there might be a bigger bug here than I'm realizing, but we can fix that later. So if I go update that with the proper IDs, and I refresh this screen, we can see there's store data for Pioneers, 33, 32, and then down here, because I didn't specify parameters, it still did both. So Pioneers and Pine Lake. And then today's hours, you can see doors are open at both locations right now. So now we have a shortcode that just magically displays stuff from Google Places. So if I go change Google Places data, which my wife works at Source Fit, and she'd probably get mad at me for changing that live. I'm not going to change their business hours right now, but if you go change it in Google Places, this will reflect it almost instantly, assuming that a cache hasn't cached it, but that'll refresh within an hour or so usually. And then the other example was the map. So we added a shortcode. We wanted to drop a Google map on the page. So here are two shortcodes that I created. One that's just dropping a map, and because we didn't specify parameters, it's going to be a map with all pinpoints for all of our locations, and an example of one that only has one pinpoint for one location. Yep. Thank you. Was it 30? I think 34 was one of them, right? 33 and 32. I guessed exactly wrong. All right. So we'll go on to that. I'll save that one, and we'll jump over to the final version of that. And so let's go back to our store locations. I saved one and not the other. So if we come into Pine Lake, there's no grid coordinates because I didn't come in and hit update. So now we've got grid coordinates there. And refresh that. Boom. Now you can see Lincoln. We've got one location over here. And because Google Places has the pinpoint on the exact grid coordinates, you can see, Google says it's there on that end of the building, and that's where it really is. And this is just Google Maps. Zoom with the scroll wheel and drag around just like you do with Google Maps. And there's a template that we can create for what shows up within this little pop-up box. So if we go look at, is it in here? This is a very simple HTML class here. You can modify this and change what that little pop-up box is within here. So you can add navigation links, you can add pictures, or whatever you want within this little pop-up box. Yeah, so even the Street View works right there in your website on WordPress. And you can see this one automatically went to one location because we had one ID. So yeah, that kind of concludes the presentation. That's all I had prepared as far as code. I know I flew through a lot of stuff. If you went and paid a developer or asked a developer to build this for you, that probably would have taken about a day and a half. So I condensed that into 38 minutes. So I know I went through a lot. It's really probably hard to follow. I'm available for questions at any time, either here or my email address is published on there. I'm more than happy to talk through things. And yeah, are there any questions right now? Yes, I believe they're going to publish my slides, and it's got the link to the GitHub repo on it. But if you just look for Stonefin on GitHub, you can see all of our public. No, it's under my company's name. So anybody, in this particular case, anybody that puts a shortcode in their post. So quite literally, if you had, at this point, because we haven't prevented that necessarily, if you go and make a post in a blog and you want to drop a map shortcode to a specific ID, they'd be able to do that. But on the flip side, they probably wouldn't be able to know the IDs necessarily, but there's other ways of exposing that kind of information to them. Sure.
So unless you explicitly do it and say not to, shortcodes are available on it?
I believe so. Do you know that for sure, Jeff? Sorry, I've got my built-in hecklers that aren't heckling me right now.
Well, that's kind of cool.
I haven't seen anyone put shortcode in comments, so
Yeah, it'd be a little brave, but
Yeah.
I mean,
you'd have to know something.
they have to know the shortcodes.
Yeah.
But that
Well, it's a live demo. Why not? And copy that. And I'll just come out here. Recent posts. I'll edit my post. I mean, I know I'm an admin at this point, but yeah, and it just shows up in the post at that point. But on the flip side, if we take that, go into an incognito window, go to the same page, and we're not logged in, it does in fact display. But I'm not logged in, so I can't edit any of the posts at this point. Can I comment with a short code? Is that what you're asking? That would be interesting. Oh, required fields. So it does block it by default in comments when they come from public. But I'm pretty certain you can expose them to situations like this, but I don't know that you'd want to. Yes?
Is there a designated file structure that WordPress requires, or is that just the way you like to work?
There is a. Did you experience that with DigiWidgets? Like, we made a plugin called DigiWidgets. If you ever want to do like Photoshop inside of your website, you can go find DigiWidgets and like literally upload images. But
So if you wanted to put it on, say, WordPress.org or something like that, they don't have a specific, I don't think they had a particular, like, you need to have it in this file structure. It's mostly personal preference. WordPress.org, though, would require that you don't obfuscate any of the code in there. Like, it's all got to be
human readable.
human readable, that sort of thing.
And they do, I know they blasted us a little bit about certain method calls saying, hey, this is deprecated or this is about to be deprecated, sorry, we didn't tell you. Things like that when we go to publish it. But when you go to publish a plugin on WordPress.org for the first time, yeah, they go through a vetting process, I guess similar to what you might go through with an Apple app where they tell you yay or nay. But as far as structure of code, unless they found an explicit like security vulnerability or you obfuscated your code, that's not okay because you know it's GPL and all. Then generally it just goes through.
If you were just developing like a plugin for your company that you're not planning on releasing or anything, you could do whatever file.
All of this code could have been in one file. It would have worked. On the flip side, the way we abstracted it, you know, it only includes certain pieces of code when it needs them throughout the page browsing. So, you know, if you're worried about having too many plugins slowing down your site, I mean, that's a common thing that people run into. You hit that WordPress site and somebody says, why is my site slow? And you find 7,000 plugins installed. It's because every one of them has to have their PHP code executed, and that PHP code decides how much more PHP code is included. So by abstracting it this way, we kind of protect ourselves and we only include as much as we need for that specific view in that moment. Yes?
So I'm coming from the Visual Studio type environment.
Mm-hmm.
Is there within this tool, like, you said you could set breakpoints and stuff. So
It's, I'm a .NET guy actually. That's where I came from before I did WordPress, so I know exactly what you're saying there. But if we go into store locations and don't hit the wrong button, and we go here, I want to add a breakpoint there, and refresh this page, you'll notice that it's flashing here, and now it's F9. they changed the key mapping, so F9 is continue, so I just ruined that. So I'll refresh the screen, come back here. So F8, I can now step through the code, and I can see what the various variables are. So I can come in and I'll set a breakpoint here. So for those of you that haven't been debugging in like a breakpoint type world like this, you can see that I've got this red dot with the little check mark in it. That means it's at that point in code execution. The page isn't refreshing, it's waiting for this to continue. So we're going to execute this line by line. We're going to add these bits of short code, and then there's this function. And I don't see a nice place where there's variables for me to just to show you. And literally, this is just jumping around. This is PHP Storm from JetBrains. Sure.
So when you started this, you spun up
The virtual machine, the vagrant box.
can you, instead of using that, can you use like the WAMP stack for that? Or does it really have to be the VVV to be able to hook into it and
I don't know that answer for sure. I've not really messed with LAMP myself. I just know that from my perspective, I found VVV and I had WordPress projects in hand and they went together, and it made my development life way, way better than trying to do things in like Notepad or Atom or something like that. So I can't give you that answer. I could look it up or help you find that answer. But in this particular case, if you go find the VVV repo on GitHub, it's just instructions top to bottom on how to do it with this stack. Yes?
I can answer it for you.
Awesome.
Technically, yes, but like you said, it's easier to get it set up when you're using tools already built to set it up. But if you want to do all your own custom configurations, yeah.
okay.
I was going to try and find another example of like a breakpoint that I can hit to demonstrate for those that haven't seen breakpoints. Is there anybody here that's unfamiliar with that concept of setting breakpoints and wants to know more? I find that I'm surprised at how many people have never experienced that concept before. But what's that? Go for it. So I'll look in the Google Places API. This is the get code function. So this function is what's called when we save our location and it goes out and gets the grid coordinates. So if we come back here, that. Now I'm going to hit F9 so it continues. I don't want to stop at my breakpoints. So if we come back here, refresh the screen, it only goes and gets these if they're blank. So if you went and tweaked them yourself, then it would stick with what you put in there rather than refreshing that. So if I blank them out and I hit update, it'll hit my breakpoint back here in this code. And I can see if I hover over address, or if I look down here, you can see these variables. And so address currently is set to that. And it's going to go reset it, so we can hit F8 and step through, and you can see the variables changing. So address, it went and reset it from Google Places, and it got the URL. And then this JSON just got set, so we've got a whole bunch of data there. Make sure that the status is good, and then go set the latitude. And you can see latitude just got set to that. The longitude just got set. And a place ID will get set next, and then formatted address. So you can see all of these variables get populated as you step through the code, and you can see, all right, this data is wonky. That's why this went wrong. That's kind of the premise there.
So, like you said, those variables, did you have those variables? Or like the API?
So these variables, this code here, this is the code that the royal we wrote to go out and get this data. So if you go out and look for get code or geocode PHP, doing these types of map operations with Google Maps, there's examples all over the web. And you can find a function that's like, all right, here's how you call the Maps API. And then here's how you call specifically for the location data. And here's how to extract that location data from it. It's very, very well supported. I love messing with Google just because there's so much you can hack. Any other questions? I know that the filming stuff is like automatic. I don't know if they cut me off. So hopefully they didn't. But I guess that concludes our class for today. And as always, today and forever, if you have questions on development stuff, I'd love to chat and help you out and go from there.